All right, thank you, Andy. Great to be here this morning. I notice up front here the air conditioning is working a little bit better than in the back, and after that first panel, I think things are going to heat up even just a little bit more. I'll introduce the panel to you. Sitting immediately to my left is Kirsten Diedrich, and she is currently the chair for the State Board of Higher Education. She's a professor at Concordia in Moorhead and was appointed to the Board of Directors for the Association of the Community College of Trustees in 2013. She's also the NDACCT coordinator for the West region of the state. Dr. Diedrich. Also to her left is a pretty familiar face to most of us. Not pretty so much, Larry. Don't take that out of context. He's the interim chancellor of the university system. Dr. Skogan was president at Bismarck State College, and it's a position that he'll return to after he finishes out this job in July of 2015. And also, he's a retired career veteran of the United States Air Force and has worked as a high school teacher and a college instructor and administrator for many military and civilian institutions. Dr. Skogan. To his left is Mr. Murray Sagsveen, now retired. He was the Associate Executive Director of the American Academy of Neurology from 2001 to 2011, among other high-level council positions for the American Academy of Neurology Institute, American Academy of Neurology Foundation, and the United States Council in Neurologic Subspecialties. He, as many of you know, has held several positions in state government since 1973, alongside his years in private practice. Mr. Sagsveen, good to see you. And to his left, State Senator David Hogue. He was elected to the Senate in 2008 and serves as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and as chair of the Senate Republican Caucus. He is an attorney in private practice and also a combat veteran who served in Afghanistan, Senator Hogue. And finally, to the far left is Representative Al Carlson, who has served in the North Dakota House since 1993. He's past president of the FM Home Builders Association and past president of the North Dakota Association of Builders, and currently is the chair for the American Legislative Exchange Council. Representative Carlson. That's our panel. We're going to start off with this issue of potentially dissolving the current State Board of Higher Education and switch to a three-member panel. This was brought forward by the legislative body last session and will be put to a vote in November. Do we dissolve our current structure and switch to a three-member panel appointed by the governor or not? Representative Carlson, we'll start with you. I know you're very passionate about this issue, and we'll give you a little bit of time to tell us why this is something we should look at supporting.
Well, thank you for having us today. I think there's a big crowd out here. I can't see any of you, but it's probably better that way. Then one of my colleagues will make faces out there that I have to look at. But this has been an issue that obviously the legislature funds the higher education system in North Dakota. We're putting almost $1 billion into a system to educate our workforce and educating the kids of the state of North Dakota. I believe that this enterprise that we call higher education has grown way beyond the ability of a group of volunteers, and I would never belittle those who would stand up and donate their time and give their time to any type of a board that runs something that's this big. But I believe that it's become very difficult with once-a-month meetings that become a lot more than that to be able to run and to function within a system like ours. Now, this has not been, the Board of Higher Education, the legislature really hasn't had to say much in recent years because they seem to be on the front page of the paper quite often with various things that have happened, diploma mills, the firing of a chancellor, the $1 million buyouts, and REACT buildings in Grand Forks, and a number of things. Now, those problems might be part of what we're looking at, but the biggest problem is that this has to deal with is governance, is how do you govern a system of a $2 billion enterprise to educate the workforce in North Dakota. We understand the value to each one of the communities that has these institutions, And you hear lots of things like the reason the legislature wants to do this is they want to close down Mayville State. Well, that's just not true. Because if you read the measure, you'll find that every one of those places has to have an institution at them, and it lists all 11. And by the way, today, there's 3 of them that are not listed in the Constitution already, and that's Bismarck State College right here in town. It's Williston and Lake Region are never mentioned anyway, and we have never attempted to close any of those 3, even though they're not constitutionally protected. So why do we want to do this? We think that a full-time staff is required, that a full-time 3-member board or commission that would be hands-on at all times dealing with this enterprise. You know, I read the newspaper today. I'm sure the Board of Higher Ed has read that, and it talks about, the headline was, North Dakota Higher Ed Board cites lack of trust. Well, we can't have that as taxpayers and as citizens that are funding this organization. We need to make sure that this is a smoothly run operational system that understands the role of the board and it understands the role of the college presidents. And there seems to be a real misconnect in today's situation. So I believe that we are, and Senator Hogue will talk a lot about the governance thing and the accreditation thing, and I'm sure that'll be a big part of our discussion today. And I'm looking forward to be able to talk about that issue, because I think there's reality and there's fiction, and we need to make sure we understand what happens if the voters of North Dakota change governance. I believe it's going to be a better system for our kids and for our universities when it's all done. We do not need we're not here to create a fight, we're here to create a governance system that deals with the next 20 years, not the past 20 years. So I'll finish with that, and we'll talk more about it as we get through the other panelists.
Dr. Diedrich, I guess we'll give you an opportunity here to respond and support, I guess, the current state of higher education in North Dakota. There's no question there's been some turmoil, perhaps to say the least, in our recent future. Yeah. However, turning it over to the hands of a 3-member commission appointed by the governor, is that a good idea? Does that give the legislature too much power, perhaps?
Well, I think I would like to bring it back to a historical perspective and why we actually have a State Board of Higher Education. Back in 1937, there was a little political unrest, a little bit of the politicians getting their fingers into the institutions of higher education to the point where one institution lost its accreditation. Okay. The following year, the public came forth and had a resolution to amend the Constitution and put in place the Board of Higher Education to stop this type of meddling and to put together a buffer between political agendas in higher education. And I believe that the current resolution has some questions that just need to be addressed before the public comes in and casts a vote. And one of those questions would be, as you know, we're always under the microscope on our open meetings and open records. Well, if you have a 3-member paid board, how would they ever discuss business? Whenever 2 of them were together, right, it would be an open meeting. And I find it very difficult, in our business, my husband's a contractor, if he could not have conversations with his fellow vice presidents, et cetera, about what's happening in the business. That's not a very healthy way to operate within a business community. And there's also, what of the issues that higher education has had, how would a 3-member commission fix that? Right now we are citizen, student-led. Okay? We are autonomous. We need to keep that autonomy. If we lose that, the accreditors will come down on us in a heartbeat. That is one of the criteria for accreditation at our institutions. My livelihood is not based on a salary. Trust me, we do not make money doing this job, and there are not any perks. Okay? But if I had to worry about feeding my family by a vote that I would take on higher education, I may not vote for what's in the best interest of our institutions. So that's just a number of my concerns.
All right, thank you. As in the first panel, we wanted to make sure that we extend an offer for you to send in your questions by texting that same number. We'll get to as many as we can. I believe the number was 22333. Since we got right into that accreditation word with Representative Carlson and Dr. Diedrich, let's stick with that just for a moment, because it seems, as you said, Representative Carlson, that this will be one of the something that is going to make a perhaps big impact one way or another. Perhaps we could have you talk just a little bit about how you can explain that accreditation perhaps won't be a big issue if this passes.
Well, I think I'll let Senator Hoag handle that, who spent a lot of time studying the accreditation, just like Mr. Sagsveen has. But just a comment about the political side of a board. Today, the board is appointed by the governor. All 8 members, they go through a process and they're appointed and they're approved by the Senate. Those 3 members will go through the exact same process. There is no difference. So if there's a political influence in one, there's a political influence in the other one. The key is that you want this thing to be run like a business, and you need to be accountable for the dollars that you spend. You need your meetings to be open. Let me tell you, the PSC has functioned, the Industrial Commission has functioned pretty well over the years with 3 members and being able to get their business done. I'll pass it on to Senator Hoag on accreditation.
Senator Hogan, same question, and then to advance the topic. In your studies, what have you found that would alleviate concerns folks have about the issue of accreditation in the future?
Well, accreditation is a very complex issue. We have 76 separate programs in our higher education system that are accredited by a number of different organizations. For example, the law school I went to at University of North Dakota is accredited by the American Bar Association. There are lots of accreditation organizations. Institutions themselves are accredited, the system is accredited. But to Representative Carlson's point, the bottom line concern of the Higher Learning Commission is that will this 3-member commission have the same autonomy that the Board of Higher Education has today? And the bottom line answer to that bottom line question is absolutely. It does not change. And so I want to get away from the idea that there's some radical change in this measure. What this measure does is it says that the governance structure is going to go from 8 to 3, but the 3 are going to be full-time people, like our Public Service Commission. And that's the change. We're going to require somebody to have a business sector leadership experience and somebody to have higher education leadership experience. But there's no other changes. And so I see a lot of people that are either supporting or opposing this measure because they think there's some hidden agenda, when the only fundamental change is that we're going to have full-time leadership. And that's the up or down proposition of this measure. Do you want full-time leadership or not? As far as open meetings, again, the Public Service Commission functions under the same open meeting law as the Board of Higher Education does. The Public Service Commission regulates telecommunications, electric utilities, pipelines, grain elevators, auctioneers, and they do a fantastic job. And they've got a great track record of managing complex industries. And so I think we have an established track record in North Dakota. Representative Carlson mentioned the Industrial Commission, another 3-member commission that has worked well. Now, I think the Industrial Commission is a little overwhelmed right now as well, but the fundamental concept that you will have full-time leadership for this complex organization is the proposition before us.
Mr. Sagsveen, if you could respond with your experience, changing the structure from 8 to 3 we can see, but again, right now we have an independent board that would be eliminated. Does this become too political if it passes?
The question is, will it become too political? I think that's the issue for the Higher Learning Commission. And in the past, I've been chief of staff at the university system since November, and from almost day one have been involved with the Higher Learning Commission as to the implementation of Measure 3 if it's adopted. I understand where Representative Carlson and Senator Hogue are coming from, but the question that I have is, based on the information that I have from the Higher Learning Commission, is it worth the risk to go from a volunteer board of 8 voting members to a full-time board or commission of 3? It's true that there will be 3 full-time commissioners, but right now you have a full-time chancellor that is working, I observe, 7 days a week on higher education business. The concern that I have is that based on the conversations with the Higher Learning Commission, they are concerned about autonomy, and they're concerned about whether the commission will have the authority to act in the best interest of the higher education. If the Higher Learning Commission decides that it does not have the autonomy and does not have the authority, then the Higher Learning Commission can do several things. It can sanction the North Dakota University system with a notice, with probation, with an order to show cause, or even revoke or withdraw the accreditation. If that happens, that triggers a whole series of events. As Senator Hogue mentioned, there are more than 76 separate accredited programs and schools within the university system. If the Higher Learning Commission sanctions the university system, that will trigger activity by those other accrediting organizations. We also have Title IV funding that provides grants to students and loans to students. And last academic year, under Title IV, there were grants to over $46 million to over 50,000 students, and loans over $224 million to over 23,000 students. And also, we did some calculations that if the Higher Learning Commission did impose sanctions of any kind, it could affect the enrollment of the 11 institutions. And one calculation was that, or staff calculated, that if it goes down only 5%, that could have a $75 million impact on the system. So I'm concerned as the Chief of Staff, what are the possible risks if the Higher Learning Commission doesn't accept this change in governance structure?
Dr. Scogan, you have an interesting perspective, having served as president at Bismarck State College for a number of years and now as interim chancellor. A question was asked, and perhaps you can speak from the school's perspective. The schools seem to have been pretty silent on this issue to this point. Where do presidents stand? And then secondarily, a question about students and some stakeholders potentially losing a voice if this measure passes.
Well, the institutions have been silent on this because I think that's a requirement, is to be silent on this. This is a measure coming before the voters of the state of North Dakota, and I guess it would, I don't know if it's legal or not. Senator Dever is back there, and I know he's interested in this issue. I asked him before we started if I would be going to jail at noon, and he said, "Ask me at noon." So, so I appreciate Senator Dever's advice there. So the institutions aren't going to stand up and take a position on the measure. I will say, though, as a former president and currently as the interim chancellor of the university system, that I believe that I speak for all of us in the cabinet, that we believe that the State Board of Higher Education is the proper governing mechanism for higher education in the state of North Dakota, because it is the model of governance across the nation. We have asked the Higher Learning Commission, because we thought, well, maybe we could look at some models someplace, and Murray and I had a conversation with the legal counsel of the Higher Learning Commission and said, is there a model like this any place in the country that we could take a look at? And the answer was no. There is no such model of a commission running higher education, of a three-member commission running higher education. Higher education is governed in the United States by boards. Some of those boards are appointed by their governors, some are appointed by their senates, some are elected. There are, all across the country, there are boards that people actually run for election and they get voted onto the board, and then they run the boards. And those boards are basically all citizen soldiers that are running higher education. That is the form of governance. That is the model of higher education in the country. And so this would be taking a real different, a step in a different direction to have a commission. We would be plowing new ground. You know, I have the deepest respect for Mr. Leader and for the senator on their views of how we govern higher education, but I think we need to step back and look at how higher education is run across the country. The commission model that was mentioned, and we all know the Industrial Commission, incredibly important, and certainly since the boom has started, the Industrial Commission has become far more important to our state. And we know that the Public Service Commission is incredibly important. The individuals that are elected to that commission carry different portfolios, but neither of those commissions is a governing board. Those commissions are regulatory. I would argue that having commissioners carry portfolios relative to utilities and relative to pipelines and so forth, that they have a different responsibility than actually governing institutions. And so I don't know that our experience in the state, and the state's got a lot of experience in commissions. We've got more boards and commissions, I think, than any other state. So we've got a lot of experience in them. But I don't know that a three-member commission, that we have the experience of a three-member commission actually governing, and Mr. Leader's absolutely right. It's a huge enterprise, but we're not huge comparative nationally. There are institutions all over this country, very large institutions. I'm a graduate of Arizona State University. I went down there with 65,000 very close friends, okay? That's one institution. We have 42,000 students in our entire system, and one institution in Arizona has 65,000, and that institution is governed by a board of regents, and they are appointed by their governor. That is the model for higher education. To the senator's point about there is no grand change, if you put the language side by side, and this, by the way, I agree with the senator, the selection of the commission as written in the measure is not the issue for the Higher Learning Commission, because he is absolutely right. It is exactly what it already is. I agree with him completely on that. I don't think that's the issue at all. I think the issue is what kind of control does that governing body have on our 11 institutions of higher learning? So, for example, right now, this is what our Constitution says. Am I okay to read this thing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We'll get the Senator, or Representative Carlson and Senator Hogan in a moment, but go ahead.
Okay. The said State Board of Higher Education shall have full authority over the institutions under its control, with the right among its powers to prescribe, limit, or modify courses offered at the institutions, and shall have full authority to organize or reorganize within constitutional and statutory limitations the work of each institution under its control, and do each and everything necessary and proper for the efficient and economic administration of said state educational institutions. That's what our Constitution says right now. And that says it, as Dr. Diederich pointed out, because the political influence in 1937 resulted in the removal of accreditation from what is now NDSU. In fact, the history behind that is that the governor fired some faculty members, and the Higher Learning Commission came in and said, you can't do that. Therefore, you have no academic freedom. If the governor can fire faculty members, you have no academic freedom. Therefore, you're not accredited. And so the voters in the state of North Dakota said, well, then let's amend our Constitution. Let's create the State Board of Higher Education. And what I just read to you is what the Constitution says. So the measure says, quote, the commission has full executive responsibility for the management and operation of the North Dakota University system within constitutional and statutory requirements and limitations, period. I think that's a vast difference. And I think what North Dakotans need to ask when they consider their position on this measure, they need to ask, do we want an independent board that has full control over 11 institutions, or do we want a commission of 3 members that will govern those within statutory requirements and limitations? So I think the actual control of the institutions does change dramatically with that language.
Representative Carlson, as this bill was being crafted, and they're saying there's not another model nationwide to associate this with. How did you guys craft the bill and come up with this? Because as mentioned earlier, it did pass both legislative bodies this spring to get to this point, so it had some support, at least at the Capitol.
Well, I think the bill had many different faces. It had a different face when it left the House, and it had a different face when it came to us from the Senate. And the model that was decided upon is the 3-commission model. I think that if you're looking for a red herring, I don't think that the Board of Higher Education or the legislature or the citizens can definitely answer what's going to happen with accreditation. It would be, if they say, oh, we're going to lose it, I don't believe they can say that. If we say we're never going to lose it, I don't believe we can say that. A system of governance is very important to the efficient functioning of the university system. When I read an article like I read in the paper today, and I read and I have phone calls from citizens in Dickinson about a diploma mill, and the only person who was ever released from out there was the one, unfortunately, who killed himself. I'm telling you, if we didn't lose accreditation over that, we're not going to lose accreditation over much of anything. Because that was an absolute shame what happened, and really very little was done to rectify that. So when I read that the board needs to rein in control, what is your relationship to the presidents, I don't think that's been defined at all. In fact, in the last session, as the chancellor came into my office, the previous chancellor to this one, who was given a very large buyout and sent down the road, he told me that football coaches shouldn't be president. He told me that deans of campuses should never be presidents of universities in North Dakota. I can list the names that go with those titles. Now, that is the information we get from a board office where they have put complete control to him. He also told me that when we have a board meeting, the presidents can be in the room, but they can't speak because it's a board meeting. What kind of a system is that? Now, my point to that is, what is the role of the presidents? From one day they have complete control to the next day having absolutely none. We need a better form of governance that identifies what we expect as taxpayers. This isn't their money, and it isn't our money. This is the taxpayers' money. And they expect results for those $1 billion that we send out to those campuses and all those buildings we build. I don't believe that the red herring exists on accreditation. I've read the letters that they sent. And the letters basically say we're going to look it over when we see and the voters pass it, we're going to look it over and see how it works. We can argue over the words today or not today, but the question is higher education prepared for the next 20 years? Is it better off today than it was 10 years ago in terms of the results we're getting out of our students and the dollars we're spending? That's the question that should be asked.
Dr. Diedrich, I'd like to ask, since someone from the audience had asked, can you honestly say the board is functioning well now? A tough question, but there have been a lot of headlines through the years.
Yes, we are functioning much better than we have been in the past. We actually did listen, and we're learning that we needed some board training. I think what Representative Carlson is alluding to was the Fargo Forum this morning and the Grand Forks Herald. And believe it or not, I am thrilled that information made the front page of the Fargo Forum. That is what we're trying to get across. We are going through training, we're learning, we're trying to become the best functioning board that we can be. We did not break in open meetings. If we wanted to hide that, why were we running a tape recorder through the whole, I don't remember if we were in there for an hour or half an hour. We knew this was coming out, but we needed to have this discussion. Okay? We're not hiding anything. We are going to do a board self-evaluation. These are all things that Larry Scogan and I promised when we took over the leadership position a year and 2 months ago. Trust through transparency and board training, and we are doing just that.
Senator Hogue, your perspective on this bill as it was worked on in both chambers and where it's at now, and the current state of the board and the financial picture associated with this. I know there's concern about spending at the universities and things being out of control. When you look at the numbers, how do you see the Higher Learning Commission reining in spending or perhaps taking a different direction, or in your opinion, maybe what would be a better approach in the future?
Thank you. I guess I know there's always going to be resistance to change, especially from folks who are adversely affected by the change. But when I look at our models that have worked for us in North Dakota, that's what we as the legislature decided to go with. And we just didn't pick out something that hasn't worked in the past. Now, I realize the board wants to go back to 1938 and make that the basis for saying we can't make any change. But I'd like to go back maybe 20 years later to 1990, when we created the Bank of North Dakota. We created the state mill and elevator. And you know what? No other state in the country has those institutions. We have them. They make money for us. They subsidize the tax burden that we have. Nobody has created those since. Now, we have legislators from other states come to North Dakota and want to look at our Bank of North Dakota because they want to do that too. But to dwell on the past, I think, is a mistake because, again, Tom, to your comment about this being a political commission, it's not. They are appointed the same way. They serve for the same term. They can be removed the same way. The only thing that's political is that they've gone from 8 to 3. And the idea that we're going to have politics out of higher education is a complete fiction. Okay, anytime there's an issue, whether it's the Fighting Sioux nickname or athletics, you're going to have politics involved in higher education because we're all passionate about it. It's our alma mater. We feel strongly. We're going to contact people. You're not going to remove politics from higher education. The other point I guess I would point out is it's not just, Representative Carlson said, well, this is $1 billion industry. We probably should have full-time leadership and not the model that we created in 1938. But if you look at the past 4 higher education board members who have resigned, each one of them has cited the workload as a reason to step down. Klaus Lemke, a former Burleigh County Commissioner who's familiar with public service, he said, it was affecting my health, my job. I'd show up at higher ed board meetings expecting to get a 10 or 15 page packet, and I got 300 to 600 pages of materials to review. Michael Haugen, the former Adjutant General of the state of North Dakota, who served as the Adjutant General during 9/11, he told the forum in April of 2012, it's easier to travel through the Middle East during 9/11 than it is to serve on the State Board of Higher Education. Richie Smith, the former president from Wahpeton, interviewed by the Fargo Forum. I'm tired. It interferes with my practice as a lawyer and my family. John Bacchus, former president, a colleague of mine from Minot. I can't do it all. His comments were to the forum, I serve as an attorney in private practice. I have a family. I cannot do it. So to those of you who would cling to what we have now, I would ask you to examine what is the cost of doing nothing. Because that's what we did in the Senate. What is the cost of doing nothing? And we didn't just look to our institutions, but we did some research on what are the national leaders of higher education saying. Folks like Derek Bach, the former president of Harvard, or the former president of Princeton. And they all talk about a constant and chronic cost crisis in higher education across 50 states. They talk about higher education being committed to getting more new shiny buildings for graduate programs, than educating students. So to your question, is there something wrong with higher education? Yes, I think there is, and this measure isn't going to solve it. But at the same time, we as legislators have to look at the policy issues, and the policy issue is there is a bubble coming that's going to burst, and it involves the cost of higher education and building costs into the system that aren't going for educating students. We spend today over $600 million on the state side without tuition to educate our students. A student's average loan is $61,000, and that's going up. And their average income from a bachelor's degree is going down. So what folks like Bach and the former president of Princeton are talking about is we're on an unsustainable path, and the institutions across this nation don't understand it. And that's a fundamental flaw, I think, but it's not going to be addressed by this measure. That'll come later.
Murray, you've have a lot of executive experience in a number of different areas. Since you've been with the higher education system in your time, what's been your perspective on can it work moving forward in its current state?
That's a good question. I think it can work very well in its present state. As you have read about in the newspaper, the Board of Higher Education is going through training, reviewing, how can we do the job better? I don't buy the argument that volunteer people cannot run higher education. I mean, if you carry this to the an illogical extension, all members of the Legislative Assembly are volunteers, and they're running the entire state of North Dakota. You go to MDU or Basin Electric or any other large organization, they're run by boards of directors. You go to where I previously worked at an International Medical Association, run by a board of directors. What the board does is the board hires a chief executive officer to run the organization and holds that chief executive officer accountable for making sure that it's done. Here, it's the same situation. You have a committee, a nominating committee, headed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the Superintendent of Public Instruction, nominating people to the governor. The governor appoints from that list and submits that appointment to the Senate, and the Senate vets that person and puts it on a board of higher education. You can't do a better job than that. And that board has to have the autonomy to run the system. And it's doing it all across the United States. It's doing it in for-profit organizations, in publicly traded organizations, and it has worked here for years and years and years. Yes, there are bumps, there are speed bumps, but they're corrected. Yes, there was a problem at Dickinson State University. That person was removed. Yes, there was a problem at NDSU. That president is no longer there. Yes, there was a problem with the chancellor, the previous chancellor. That chancellor is no longer there. The board stepped up, did what it had to do, and is running the organization. I'm totally comfortable with this type of a governance structure. I've lived with it for years. I'm living with it now, and it works. It has challenges, just like any other organization, but it works.
Representative Carlson, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that. One question had been asked, 'cause it sure seems like it can be a legislature v. higher ed situation where heads butt, things like that. Would potentially the same situation exist with the new three-person commission? How do you see working together if this passes moving forward? And someone had made the good point about students being number one in this whole process.
You know, I agree with that the students are number one and results should be number one. You know, what is a satisfactory graduation rate? Is it 14%? Is it 26%? Is it 28%? What's your satisfactory rate? And how many kids are able to graduate in 4 years? Is that a criteria that's important? I think it's important. For years, and I guess the longer you stay in the legislature, and I've been here 22 years, I've been through a lot of the phases of higher education and through lots of board members. Even though in the House we never, to get to approve those, the senators take that privilege away from us. They probably figured 94 of us could never agree on anything anyway, so that's why I did it. But the point is, the student is key here. And the taxpayers' dollars and how we spend those dollars is the key. You know, the funding mechanism, for example, for 3 bienniums, I'd go home to Fargo, and they would tell me at NDSU, because of the funding system that we gave one block payment to higher education and they divided it out, that they were always underfunded for the number of kids they actually had in the chairs. So last time, we asked the board, said, come up with a formula. Change your formula. Look at a different funding mechanism so we don't have this problem. They decided to put it off till the next biennium, so the legislature did it last session, and for the first time, NDSU wasn't shortchanged on its dollars. Even though they still think they're missing $1 million, they got $4.5 million more than before. That was a legislative initiative. That did not come from a chancellor. That did not come from a board, which in my opinion should have if they were doing their job. Now, again, it's really hard to keep personalities out of this, but those people that volunteer, God bless them for doing that, because I'm up here talking about governance, but there's people that sit in those chairs that we're trying to remove. You know, and we're not here to beat up on them. We're saying that the next 20 years needs a different style of governance, and that we think that'll work. By the way, there is no chancellor in the Constitution. That was created by the office. That was created as a chancellor position. And by the way, today up in that chancellor's office, there's 36 full-time employees. I'm not quite sure what all happens with all 36 of those. And if you add in the IT, which we moved over there this time, there's 113 people that have no direct tie to the campuses other than that they have titles and work on things for the good of the system. So somebody asked me, how do you pay for this? How do you pay for these 3 full-time members? Well, I found about $12.6 million is the operating budget for the chancellor's office. So I think we got plenty there to get it set up and get those 3 people with the proper things they need to do. But the key to this still is, what is the role of the board and what is the role of the presidents? And I don't think that's by any means even close to being defined.
Dr. Diedrich?
Okay. I would like to address the role of the board and the role of the presidents. The board over the last year has been looking at a governance model that is called policy governance. We haven't adopted it yet, but we have discussions that this is the direction we would like to move, because it actually sets us up where the board can get back into being a policy board instead of getting into the weeds. The presidents then would be those that are on the ground doing the work and fulfilling the goals that we provide those presidents. Now, when it's set up this way, the board comes forward to the presidents. Different schools could have different goals, but we give those goals to the presidents, and then the presidents determine how they're going to reach those goals, instead of us telling them how to do it. That's what we pay them for. That's why we get these top quality presidents. We want them to run their institutions, and we want them to fulfill our goals, but let's give them a little latitude to get this done, and then hold them accountable for how they did it. You know, as long as they stay within some certain parameters, we say, go for it. You know, if they go outside those parameters, then they're going to have to address the board and explain why they did it that way or why they did not reach those goals. So that's the direction we're going with what is the role of the board and what is the role of the presidents.
Dr. Scogan.
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to, I compliment Mr. Leader for his comment that it's about students. And it'd be nice to be in higher education and talk about students, because that's really what it's about. Both traditional and non-traditional students, both credit and non-credit students. And for just a moment, I would just like to brag on the university system and the institutions for what we do for students and how effective we are for students. I don't think there's any challenge in the state of North Dakota right now greater than the challenge of workforce. Most of you out here are in business, and I know that hiring personnel and hiring engineers and doing all that sort of stuff, it has got to be on your plate every day, trying to fill positions. You know, in this position, I've traveled all over the state, and I don't care where I go, I see help wanted signs out. I see help wanted signs for all positions. I talk to CEOs of companies, and they talk about recruiting engineers and trying to get enough engineers and all that sort of stuff. So I think one of the things that North Dakotans need to say is, well, how effective has our educational system? My guess is that almost everybody in here has graduated from one of the institutions in North Dakota that has been governed by the State Board of Higher Education. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm sure you're feeling pretty good about your education. You didn't go through an education here in the state of North Dakota through one of our public institutions and get done and say, well, now I've got to go someplace else and get a good education. You moved into the workforce, and that's the challenge that I know that business has, is having enough workforce. And we've got institutions out there. Take a look at what's going on at Bismarck State College and NDSCS relative to everything that's going on in the Bakken and going on in the Red River. Take a look at what Lake Region is doing, what UND and NDSU are doing. NDSU, UND, and Lake Region are combined with the Department of Commerce for one of only 6 UAS test sites in the United States. One of only 6 test sites in the United States, and 3 of your institutions are actively involved in that. So what's wrong? If the federal government decided to put a UAS site at Grand Forks that involved 3 of our institutions, what are we doing wrong where the rubber meets the road? And some of the statistics, and North Dakotans need to be proud of this. You know, I brought a whole bunch of statistics with me I haven't gotten a chance to get to, but you know, when you take a look at nations and the states in the percentage of young adult degree attainment, this is one of the measures of success of a society, is how many of your 25 to 34-year-olds have attained a college education. Number 1 on the list is Korea. Then comes Japan and Canada. Then comes Massachusetts. Then comes North Dakota. And there's a whole list under there of every state and every nation that's counted after that. So we're sitting, as a state, we're sitting right behind Massachusetts in degree attainment. Our young people are getting degrees. When you take a look, and if I went through all these statistics here, you take a look at bachelor degrees. For 25 to 34-year-olds, 35 to 44-year-olds, we're ahead national averages all across the board. When you think about what's going on up in Williston with the workforce training needs that are up there, when you think about the exciting new programs, UND's new program in petroleum engineering, think about how exciting it is. They started like with 30 students, and 18 months later they had 200 students in that program, and it's still growing. And Hess Corporation just gave a big grant to that program, not because they thought that the board's dysfunctional and higher education isn't working in the state of North Dakota. They gave a big grant to UND in that program because they said, this is working and we need the students that come out of this program. And I could go on and on through every institution that we have, on wonderful programs they've got, on the creativity that's going on all over the place in all of our institutions. So let's talk about the students, and let's talk about the products from those institutions. And I think you as businesses would say, yeah, we're getting the workforce that we need out of these institutions. And if you're not, somebody needs to tell us. But when I see corporations like Hess giving large grants to our institutions, that means that they're investing in something. When I go to Bismarck State College and see the National Energy Center of Excellence, what a wonderful collaboration that was between the state, the federal government, and private industry. And Basin Electric gave $2 million because they wanted what comes out of that institution, the product of that institution. That institution is governed by the State Board of Higher Education. UND is governed by the State Board of Higher Education. NDSU and all the engineering programs and all the ag research that's going on, that's governed by the State Board of Higher Education. So let's, so I agree with Mr. Leader. The issue is the results. And so I would ask you as North Dakotans, is the university system and its institutions, are they in fact educating the future of North Dakota? And I think we are.
Representative Carlson, I'll give you chance to respond to that, but also a question that came in. Lawmakers, would you get too much sway if this passes? The question was, if this does pass, does it give lawmakers the ability to get involved in day-to-day operations on campuses across the state?
You know, our role has always been, since I've been there, especially when the roundtable came into play, is that our job was to fund the institutions and then ask some basic questions. I mean, I can go through a whole history, how we used to do campus budgets and how we do them today, and it's completely different. I mean, we used to sit down with the president and with his chief of staff, and we'd sit down with the facilities manager and talk about their needs at each and every campus. We don't do that today. We get some message from above, and we're supposed to accept those numbers. I don't believe the legislature has micromanaged higher education. I mean, we can go back and they talk about Wild Bill Langer firing 5 people in 1937. This is 77 years later. What higher education needs to do, and here's where I'll agree with somewhat with Mr. Scogan, is that we need to be, as higher education, more in tune to the students and the workforce needs. The higher education is notoriously slow for being reactionary to the marketplace. They need to be reactionary. We built a diesel building at Wapton Science, and we should have built it twice as big. And you know where that came from? On the priority list, they wanted to remodel Old Main, and the legislature said, no, we're going to build the diesel mechanic building so that we get more kids hired that we need out around the state to do that. So we're not in a market to micromanage. We don't micromanage the PSC, we don't micromanage the governor's office, we don't micromanage the Secretary of State. We have the ability to make them accountable for the taxpayers' dollars that we spend. And we have no intention, and I have not seen that done in the time I've been there. And we can't look back 77 years and say, well, golly, they're going to start firing campus people. That's not going to happen. For example, and I'll give you one more example, and then Senator Hoke probably has some comments on this. But we've had oil in North Dakota since the 50s. And it wasn't only till a matter of 3 or 4 years ago that we finally reinstituted a petroleum engineer degree at UND. And you gotta wonder what took us all that time to have that as one of the base engineering degrees for North Dakota, because you can't find an engineer. These guys are begging for them all over the state. So there's things that need to be done. Again, it's a matter of this full-time, hands-on, feeling the marketplace, knowing what needs to be done to be reactionary. I think it's a good model.
We have just under 9 minutes left, and I want to make sure everyone is able to get a word in as a final word before the session ends. Dr. Diedrich, skyrocketing tuition, this is a question. Degrees given out at DSU that were no good. The comment was the current system is not working. Maybe just speak to that quickly.
Okay, as far as the skyrocketing tuition, I'm actually going to defer to Dr. Scogan for that. He has the data in his hand. But in short response, it would be that North Dakota is very affordable when you compare it to other institutions in the United States and within our region. So Dr. Scogan, if you'd like to give some of those numbers, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you. Just happen to have that in my stack. The issue of tuition, I know that, you know, every time that happens, it really, you know, jumps up the barometer in the state, and understandably so, because that's where the rubber meets the road and the students have to pay for it. But North Dakota, for four-year colleges in our state, North Dakota is below regional and national averages. Only at our 2-year colleges are we above regional averages, and thanks to the legislature, the last 2 bienniums prior to this one, so 3 bienniums and 2 bienniums ago, thanks to the legislature, we were able to freeze tuition at the 2-year schools. We went from 21% above regional averages, where we're now only 8% above averages. And Representative Mark Sanford, chair of the Interim Committee on Higher Education Funding, is very interested in the possibility of freezing tuition at the 2-year schools again. But at the 4-year schools, we are already a good deal for our students. We're below regional national averages. And on tuition increases, this is an eye chart that I know you all can't see, but you can see all the blue lines across there. North Dakota has had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're 5th from the bottom in tuition increases in the United States between 08 and 13. So North Dakota had an average of 9.3%, And then everybody else goes way up, and Arizona, by the way, had a 78.4% increase in tuition. So we really are affordable at our four-year schools.
We've got about 6.5 minutes left. As I said, I want all of you to be able to have a final word. Representative Carlson, we'll start with you and then work our way back toward the podium.
Well, again, we obviously put this forward as a legislature because we like the people to vote on things. And if they vote it up, we think it's the right thing to do. If they vote it down, we'll continue to fund things the way we've always funded them, and we'll expect a great deal more out of the board because the fire is on, and we're going to expect that we don't have these articles showing up in the paper if it doesn't pass. We hope it passes because we think the three members will solve that. One thing that does concern me a little bit is that they have a built-in system at the universities to get the no vote out with their students. They get word from above, from the chancellor's office, and they get word from the college presidents are told that this should be, that they could lose their jobs, or they could lose their funding, or they could lose accreditation, and get your students organized to vote no. And that bothers me a little bit because I've heard that directly from some of the campuses. So we need the people to be well informed, and I think that, thank you for doing this today, by the way, because I think this helps people become informed on the issues. We'll try and take all the fluff out of both sides and say this is better for the future in North Dakota, for the model for higher education for the next 20 years, and I think it'll be a win for the students and for the people.
Senator Hogue.
Thank you, and I want to thank the association for putting on this forum as well. I agree with Chancellor Scogan. There's a lot of great things that higher education is doing today. And I realize that a lot of times they get pot shots from the side, sniper fire I call it, you know, and that's got to go with the territory. That's always going to be there. I thought one of the great initiatives recently was to take over the Sanford nursing program in Bismarck here. The health community has been crying for more nurses for at least 10 years. And now we finally have an initiative to expand that capacity. And that's a great thing, but at the same time, I saw that some legislators weren't happy with it because it didn't fit their tastes. And I think what we all need to take away and realize is when you have a legislative body, each one of those legislators can speak out and voice their objections. That doesn't mean they're speaking on behalf of the legislature. I mean, we had a couple sessions ago, we had somebody put in a bill that wanted to require UND to play NDSU in football. And of course, that bill was shot down. But those things are going to happen, and that just goes with the territory. What I would like to say is all of these collateral issues, the fundamental point is, do you want full-time people to be governing our higher education system, or do you want a part-time board? And I would invite you, if you're not struck, I would invite you to go back to the public comments of the 5 former board members, because I've got them in my folder. I'm tired. It affects my health. I thought this was once a month. Everywhere I go, people want to talk about higher education. It's easier to go into a combat zone than it is to serve on this board. We need a full-time commission, somebody that can gird themselves against all the outside political forces. We don't have that today. We don't have evidence that this board has time to think strategically. That's what we need, and that's why we should support this measure.
Mr. Sagsby.
This is a very complex issue to transition from a governing board, a volunteer governing board, and a chancellor to 3 full-time people. And we don't know what the unintended consequences of this are. And whether it's accreditation or something else. And if we're going to make big changes like this, I think we should study it more. This could have gone through an interim study. It could have gone through hearings in the legislature. And I just think that this is a big step, and we don't know what the risks are. And it reminds me of a saying my mother used to say, be careful what you wish for, you might get it.
Dr. Scogan.
I think we have an absolutely wonderful balance of power in higher education in the state of North Dakota. There is no doubt about it. The legislature, they're the appropriating arm. We could do nothing. We can't turn our lights on without the legislature support. And we really appreciate the support that we've gotten from the legislature. Over the last number of bienniums, we've seen a tremendous growth in higher education in the state of North Dakota by the investment of the legislators sitting up here. They have done a tremendous job, and we appreciate that very much. But the balance of power that's established in this state, and I think is so wonderful, is that they're the appropriators. Ultimately, they decide where we're going, and the governance of the institution and the academic freedom in the institution and so forth are all part of the State Board of Higher Ed. They don't levy taxes, they don't assign taxes, they don't appropriate. All they do is set the direction, and I think it's a wonderful balance of power.
Dr. Diedrich.
Okay. You know what, I would just like to leave you with the request that you do your research. Don't listen to the gossip, the empty statements. Ask us if you have some questions about what is happening at the university system and our institutions. Please do your research, because our institutions and our students, most importantly, are at risk. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for your insights. You guys will make the decision this November.